Hey everybody. So I made a video yesterday about Stephen Miller's speech at the Charlie Kirk funeral, and I think that that might be one of the most important topics that I've covered. And it relates to today's topic, which is that I think the Republican Party has a pretty serious problem on its hands, especially among the younger people who are choosing to join this version of the party. And I think it's only going to get worse if they don't deal with it. And I'm afraid that they're never going to be able to deal with it as long as people like Stephen Miller and Donald Trump are at the head of the party. Because the guys that I'm going to talk about today are basically just younger Stephen Millers. If Stephen Miller wasn't only a white nationalist sociopath, but if he also happened to be irremediably dumb. So maybe these guys are more like Tom Homan or Kristi Noem. But anyway, it'd be easy for me to come on here and say that these guys represent the entire Republican Party. But I don't want to do that, because, that's what Stephen Miller did in that speech that I talked about yesterday. I don't want to assign collective guilt to an entire group of people based on the actions of a few. And so I don't want to assign collective guilt to the entire Republican Party because of this one coven of young leaders. But I do want to say that directionally, this is exactly where a lot of us have been warning that this party is going to go. And it does reveal a very deep problem within the party. And it's getting worse, I think, since the 2024 election. So if you haven't heard, Politico published a bombshell story yesterday filled with excerpts from a leaked group chat between this group of young Republicans. And that group chat contains some out-of-this-world offensive stuff. And I don't need to repeat all the things that they said to make my point today. I think the title of the article tells the story. So without assigning collective guilt to the entirety of my former party, I do want to talk about the deep problem that lies at the core of these chat messages that we saw. And while I'm encouraged that so many elected Republicans have denounced those chats, and while it's fitting that several of these guys, I guess, have lost their positions now within the party, it's still disturbing that the people at the top of the party, like Donald Trump and JD Vance, have not strongly condemned these guys' words and actions, at least at the time of this recording. Trump has said nothing. And Vance today downplayed the seriousness of the messages. According to Politico, Vance said this on the Charlie Kirk show: "The reality is that kids do stupid things, especially young boys. They tell edgy, offensive jokes. That's what kids do, and I really don't want us to grow up in a country where a kid telling a stupid joke, telling a very offensive stupid joke, is cause to ruin their lives." And so I just need to point out first that these guys are young adults with real jobs, many of them in Republican politics. One is an elected Republican official. So they didn't say these things during a game of duck, duck, gray duck, but on another level, yeah. When I was a young boy, I said dumb stuff. I still say dumb stuff as a 60-year-old guy. And if you know anything about the INTP personality type, then you're going to know that my favorite kind of humor is to say some pretty irreverent and even shocking things. But that's not what this is. I can honestly say that it would never occur to me to say the things that these guys said. And yeah, as a kid, I did encounter a few boys who said things in some of these categories. And I chose not to associate with those boys. But in this version of the Republican Party, these are the kind of young adults who are getting elevated. And I never heard even the worst of the ones that I ran into, those boys in high school, talk about things like gas chambers or burning people or fantasizing out loud about coming up with ways to achieve maximum physiological suffering for their enemies. But apparently, Vance has always attracted a different crowd, even as a boy. So anyway, Vance minimized those comments, and he also engaged in his usual morally stunted junior high whataboutism by pointing to a Democrat who made horrific comments in a text in 2022. Never mind that Democrats did roundly criticize those comments when they surfaced. But Vance wrote on X, "I refuse to join the pearl clutching when powerful people are calling for political violence." So right now, October 15th, 2025, I called dibs on calling myself patient zero for Vance derangement syndrome. I get to be patient zero for Vance derangement syndrome, trademarked right now. But that phrase, pearl clutching, from the vice president of the United States, that does get exactly at the deeper problem in my former party, I think. And it's just another one of thousands of pieces of evidence that the never Trumpers were kind of right all along. Because only a person with an entirely debased conscience could say what Vance said. To brush away the genuine disgust that any decent person might feel at what those guys did, to just call it pearl clutching and to immediately try to maneuver for political points and to use it as an opportunity to continue to pump up this narrative about left-wing political violence. For him to do that, that requires not just a seared conscience, but a conscience that's spent about 3 days in the crock pot. Pearl clutching is one of those phrases that signals something very specific. This isn't your mama's Republican Party. We're the ones who take no prisoners. We're going to fight this culture war against our enemy with everything we've got. And it's a signal that Vance is above all of these petty woke concerns about decency, because we've got a culture war to fight. So I don't want to assign collective guilt to all Republicans for what these guys did. But I do want to say that as long as Stephen Miller and JD Vance and Donald Trump and people like that are at the head of the party, it's going to start to look more and more like those guys in that group chat. Because the people who voted for the first time in this election, some of them were 8 years old when Trump came on the scene. So they've grown up without the institutional memory of a time when the GOP at least pretended to care about character. I can still remember that. They don't. I know a lot of older Republican voters who I just think are naive, in my opinion, about the damage that's been done to young people from ostensibly good Republican families over the past 10 years. So many older Republican voters, I think, just haven't gotten the memo about just what a dark turn this party has taken under Trump and Vance and Stephen Miller. So they're riding on years of experience when Republicans at least gave lip service to things like integrity. But the party officially threw integrity off the bus 10 years ago. And this younger group has grown up in households, many of them, where their parents might pray with them and maybe assure the kids that we're the good ones, our family are the good ones, we're the decent ones, and that they're not like those people on the other side. But then these kids watch who their parents vote for, and they watch their parents make excuses for horrible behavior from their leaders. And they watch their parents turn on Fox News, and they watch their parents accept the obvious lies that their president tells them every day. And they watch their parents vote for this man and this movement, no matter what. And a lot of those kids are going to recoil at that hypocrisy someday, and they're going to reject their parents' political party, and they're going to reject their parents' faith, and I'll be glad when they do, because that's not any sort of faith or any sort of party that I've ever believed in. But some of those kids are going to do the other thing. Some of them are going to embrace the hypocrisy because they're going to learn the deeper lesson that their parents have taught them by accident for the past 10 years. That more important than their words about faith, more important than integrity, more important than developing a functioning conscience, power reigns supreme in that movement. Power is what matters. And they'll embrace this version of the Republican Party, where the will to power is the cardinal virtue. So that's the generation that we've been working on creating for the past 10 years. And with each year that goes by, the generations who still remember the old words about integrity, who felt pride that they functioned on a set of principles, they're going to become fewer. And all the moral energy that's been stored up in their collective memory, all the important lessons about honor that they were taught, all of those things that they feel intuitive, they think that they're intuitive. all those things are going to be exhausted. And they're going to learn that those things aren't intuitive. Those things are actually learned. Those things are taught. And you can't teach those things like integrity by practicing the opposite. So we've got a generation for whom, for the past 10 years, the loudest voice in the culture has been Donald Trump's. And they've watched their parents support that man. And we're starting to see the fruits of that decision. And this group chat is one of those fruits. And one way this shows up is in the supposed humor that was expressed in those chat messages. Humor is an incredibly important part of resistance. And transgressive humor is my favorite kind of humor. But the type of transgressive humor that these guys engaged in says a lot about the movement that they're part of. Transgressive humor is about pushing back on cultural restrictions. It's about pushing back on authoritarian power structures. It's about challenging sexual mores or religious beliefs or any system that might seek to constrain a person from thinking outside of their box. So by its nature, the best kind of humor is transgressive. It's subversive. And I think young people ought to engage in subversive humor, and so should old people. I mean, that's one way that we experiment with our beliefs, and it's one way that we test things out to discover who we really are and what we really believe. And it's one way that we tear down false structures of authority or belief. But what those guys in that group chat were doing tells us a lot about what they're trying to tear down. At its core, what I saw was a lot of talk that was designed to push back on what they'd consider, I think, what they would call woke cancel culture. What they're transgressing is any sense that they should pull back from attacking the other, from attacking the vulnerable, from demonizing their enemies. Like JD Vance, I think they would mock anyone who tries to get them to engage with their own humanity. They would call those people pearl clutchers. So let me say this in closing. On the one hand, I understand that a lot of people feel that what they would call woke cancel culture has gone too far. So when they talk this way, they think they're being transgressive on purpose, that they're trying to tear down what they see as an oppressive system where they've had to watch their words, and they think that it's all gone too far. And so if that's you or someone you love, I just want to say, here's the difference. That system that you might call woke cancel culture was never as powerful as people make it out to be. And were there excesses? Yes. But if nothing else, this last election ensured that that isn't the threat that this nation is facing. And when you use that kind of humor against vulnerable people, you're not tearing down a system. You're just hurting vulnerable people. And you're propping up the most abusive regime in any of our lifetimes. You're not being transgressive. You're just a little bit ahead of the curve of where Donald Trump and JD Vance and Stephen Miller and Tom Homan and Kristi Noem are trying to take this country. And it remains to be seen whether 10 years from now you're going to be looked at as part of a horrible fever dream that this country lived through, or if you'll be speaking at the Republican National Convention and no one's going to bat an eye. And so I guess we're going to find out. And thanks for listening.